I am at Victory Valley College today going through the brain models that we have for anatomy. The two hemispheres are separated by a long fissure called the Great Longitudinal Fissure, shown here. The Great Longitudinal Fissure. From the lateral view, we see another fissure located here called the Sylvian fissure. Sylvian fissure. One of the major landmarks that you should know is located in this model at number 4. So this would be the central sulcus. Let's see where I'm at. Okay, the central sulcus. The central sulcus is a landmark that separates the frontal lobe anteriorly from the parietal lobe posteriorly. Here is that central sulcus. In front of this sulcus, and it kind of goes like this. So in front of this sulcus, this is the frontal lobe. Within the frontal lobe, we have the primary motor cortex, shown in this model at 15. So this is the primary motor cortex, sometimes called the somatomotor cortex. Also, it has the name of Precentral Gyrus. Posterior to the frontal lobe, next we have the parietal lobe. It also is going to have the primary somatosensory cortex. The somatosensory cortex is located here at number 16. 4 is actually referring to this central sulcus here. And so another name for the somatosensory cortex here is the postcentral gyrus. Okay, the postcentral gyrus. So the parietal lobe is going to go from this point to the Sylvian fissure on the side, and in the back to just under 19 here. In this model, number 8 depicts the occipital lobe. From this landmark here, this portion is the temporal lobe. The temporal lobe. The cerebellum is located here. The cerebellum translates as little brain. Here we have cranial nerve 1. Cranial nerve 1 is the olfactory nerve. At number 2 here, we have the optic nerve. So cranial nerve number 2 is the optic nerve. You might see here where I have this lump or this bulge here. This portion of the brainstem is called the pons. The pons. Inferior to the pons, I have the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata. So here where I have this bulge, this is the pons. Posterior to this, we have the medulla oblongata. So if I point to 82 in this particular model, and I ask you for the structure, I'm going to want the answer of the septum pellucidum. The septum pellucidum is actually the membrane that divides the right and left lateral ventricles. Now, if I point here and I say name the ventricle that is located here, what I'm looking for is lateral ventricle. This is where the lateral ventricle would be. The right and left would be separated by the septum pellucidum. Here at number 40, if I'm asking for the ventricle and I point here, I'm looking for the third ventricle. The third ventricle. The third ventricle also has this blue structure at number 84. This is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Choroid plexus of the third ventricle. The third ventricle connects to the fourth ventricle located here through this structure here. This is the Cerebral Aqueduct. The Cerebral Aqueduct. The fourth and final ventricle in the brain is located here in between the brainstem and the cerebellum. One of the things I want to mention that we can see in this view, when the cerebellum is open like this, I see these very particular branch-like structures here in white. These structures are called the arbor vitae of the cerebellum. The arbor vitae of the cerebellum. At number 34, this entire structure here is called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum. This structure here is called the fornix. All right, so that is the fornix. This is the location of the pineal gland, sometimes called the pineal gland or pineal body or pineal body. Here I have a structure called the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is referred to as the master gland of the body. This is the pituitary gland. Highlighted in yellow, we see the anterior and posterior commissures. The anterior and posterior commissures. And they have these on both sides. In this half, it would be the anterior and posterior commissure. Here at 42, this is sometimes referred to as the tectum or the tectal plate or the corpora quadrigimina. For my exams, I would prefer if you separate this structure into the two main components. The top portion of this is going to be the superior colliculus. The bottom portion is the inferior colliculus. For the superior colliculus, the superior colliculus is a reflexive center that is going to orient the head and eyes towards any sudden change in light stimulus. The inferior portion is the inferior colliculus. This is your reflexive center that orients your head and eyes toward sudden changes in auditory stimuli, such as a loud sound. In this model, if I point here and I ask for the ventricle, I'm looking for a third ventricle. If I'm pointing here and I ask for the structure at number 40, I'm asking for the interthalamic adhesion.